I'm finished. This is the last review on Hunter x Hunter I will be doing for at least a little bit, and looking at the recent output from Togashi, I would imagine for quite some time. But fret not, because Daddy Mark's got some juicy content here for you today, and a celebration of sorts for my new favorite moment in the series. There are moments like this in practically every story worth telling, and in one way or another these moments end up defining their story's legacies. The chaos, fear, and power that was seen during Goku vs. Frieza, the heartbreak and loss that was experienced through the Thanos snap, and the selfish, geometric breaking idiocy that was Jack leaving Rose on the piece of driftwood big enough for both of them. But my point is, all of these are stories that in one way or another etched their names onto our collective consciousness, and this week my eyes bore witness to and fully realized a moment that I welcome to echo in my mind as the single most cathartic experience in all of Hunter x Hunter's long and winding story for me. I am of course talking about... Let's watch that again. Alright, feels good. Let's watch that again. Let's do this. I loved this arc. I just want to open with that because there are, believe it or not, people who genuinely believe that just because I didn't enjoy a hefty chunk of the Chimera Ants arc, that it must mean that I now hate this series. Regardless of what negatives I've taken from this series, it's also been a tale that's made me cry, made me laugh, and made me cheer like a friggin' madman. This is a story that, while having instances where I didn't love every little detail, still provided me with a series that challenged and captured my imagination. And yes, while the Greed Island and Chimera Ants arcs weren't the arcs for me per se, they managed to facilitate a return to what I loved about this series the most. Serious subject matter with a careful amount of comedy and a goal I can absolutely get behind. This arc that I'm about to review today, while doing nothing complicated really, helped to capture exactly what it is about Hunter x Hunter that I personally adore. And spoiler alert, this one got me a little emotional too. So let's see if you guys can guess which part got me. Let's see who knows me the best, so leave your predictions in the comments, and no cheating. Right off the bat, the two major plot lines that operate as the focus of this arc quickly establish their given goals, either carrying it over from the previous arc like Killua's adventure to save Gon, or perhaps more interestingly, the group of hand-picked hunters known as the Zodiac, tasked with helping facilitate the selection of a new chairman after Netero's passing. And would you look who we got here? Some things that came to my attention right off the bat were the minor similarities Ging shares with Gon. Throughout this series, Gon has been, in some ways subtly, or in other ways overtly intelligent, or at the very least, somewhat clever, finding solutions to problems in ways I personally wouldn't have ever thought of. And in this material, Ging shows off a much more refined application for that cleverness. He understands these people he's working alongside, and for better or worse, manipulates them into doing what he thinks is best, whether it be by throwing his name in for the chairman consideration, lending advice here and there to others, or by taking a fat one to the face. He's by far and away the best part of these chapters concerning these individuals, though he's not there for too long. A downside to these early chapters concerning the election, for me at least, were how pedantic they could be, all the while dealing with new characters primarily. With Ging being the only character in this material I have any interest in, when he's absent I felt some sense of tedium when engaging with this portion of the story, particularly as this aspect of the tale deals primarily in bureaucracy. However, unlike other arcs, this didn't lack a primary goal for me to latch onto. They are trying to select a new chairman, and all the while Ging is present in the material. And besides, the real question hanging in the air is swirling around the question, will Gon recover? And if he does, will he be in time to see his father? Something that's been a goal of his from the very start. Something that I thought was a little odd initially was the presence of a new character called Alluka, Killua's sister. She's pretty much the vehicle that makes what happens in this arc possible, and when that sort of significance or importance is thrust upon a character or their abilities, in this case both, ideally I would have liked that character to have been known to us prior, whether it be their abilities or individuality. Having spent time at the Zoldyck family mansion in prior arcs, I thought this to be a strange and somewhat contrived direction to go in for the story, that in some respects felt as though it came out of nowhere. Though I will admit that it was pointed out to me earlier this week that Alluka was depicted early on in chapter 220 during the Chimera Ant's arc in a photograph, so I guess she was conceived of much earlier in the story than she was needed, just not put into action or drawn attention to. Speaking of the character, I did enjoy Alluka quite a lot early on, perhaps more so than I thought I would. Her personality is drip-fed to us through the point of view of Killua, whether it be through flashbacks of them playing as kids, or perhaps most importantly, her dynamic with her wider family. Togashi made an interesting choice in communicating her relationship with the rest of her family and having everyone outside of Killua refer to her as he, him, or master, with Killua being the only person who refers to her as her. This was a welcomed and interesting means of communicating their relationship in a snappy and efficient fashion, because really this arc's pacing is great, it doesn't waste any time. However, I think what helped this arc flourish the most came in the form of one character returning to the spotlight, and that character is Leorio. I recognize that for many hardcore Hunter x Hunter fans out there, for me to love Leorio as much as I do might come across as perhaps strange or indicative of me not properly appreciating the material, but I think I can rationalize my position with respect to that and maintain consistency with my perspective on the series throughout. Without Leorio, it is my belief that this arc would not work for me at all, and that is not to say that there's nothing else in this arc that I love. I mean, absolutely not. I love numerous scenes Leorio had nothing to do with. However, if you were to remove Leorio from this arc, it's my belief that the rest of it would suffer greatly. So let me explain. In prior videos, I have touched on what it is about films, TV shows, and stories that makes us laugh, cry, or become emboldened to emote passionately. Now, obviously, there are a number of ways to achieve this effect, but the most effective for me that I've found has been in the pursuit of contrast. Take the final battle in One Piece's Sabaody Archipelago, for example. We've followed this gang through thick and thin. No matter what stood in their way, they've always come out on top and managed to save each other from certain disaster. And moments before this encounter in the archipelago, they were laughing, joking around, and then engage in some tremendous heart-stopping action. And as if mere candles were being extinguished or a light switch was being flicked off, one by one they are torn away from Luffy, seemingly never to be seen again. Now, what made that scene as emotional as it was for me has to be the sudden shift from togetherness, hope, and optimism to isolation, despair, and negativity. It's a striking and potent contrast that really hammers home the significance of that moment and their relationship. It's the sudden spike, that massive tonal shift, that does it for me. This can take place in a sudden realization and in the opposite direction even, wherein characters go from despair to happiness also. This is effectively the essence of the film Your Name, and particularly the final moments where we think they might not actually get together. And when they do, there's that relief and contrast. I see it, I cry for an hour, roll credits. But again, I want to reiterate that this isn't the only way to achieve this effect in people. We're all different, and as a result, different approaches work and don't work for each of us. And while I don't want to touch on this for too long, because I did enjoy most of the major beats in this story, the Chimera Ant's arc felt extremely negative to me for prolonged durations of time with little to no breaks. I understand that that's sort of the point, as the subject matter deals with some truly horrific material and perhaps a lighter touch might not have been appropriate, but this is predominantly the reason I didn't find it as potent an experience as I'm sure many of you who loved it might have found. The philosophy is interesting, but nothing I haven't explored through conversation into the late hours of the night with my closest friends, and the tone, while interesting and effective in its framing of events, feels, at least compared to the rest of the story, somewhat one note. By the time the Chimera King died, I understood that this was obviously a sad moment, but it didn't even remotely affect me like many of you described it would. There was no history for me to look back on with the character outside of some murders and a lot of fun board games, and while those were nice and enjoyable, the relentlessly grim affair that was this arc ended up making these final moments feel less sad by contrast.
Already dead.
But somewhat interestingly, while the arc didn't invoke any strong feelings from me in terms of reaction, it did spiral me into a nihilistic abyss for a solid 2 weeks, forcing me to question whether or not I should or should not finish the series. But in the end, my psychotic compulsion to complete what I set out to finish flew in the face of any dwindling mental health I had at the time. And you know what, jokes aside, I'm actually glad it did, because this arc injected back into Hunter x Hunter what I loved about the series. There was once again a sense of camaraderie painting the walls of every encounter, whether it be through Killua doing everything in his power to protect his sister and save Gon, or in the case of these scenes, they brought back Leorio. And choosing to include him in this material carried for me the second of the two major plot points in this arc for me. His offbeat goofiness combined with his love for his friend really contrasted beautifully with the mundane, boring bureaucracy the rest of this section brandishes. And in a way, sort of reminded me of how Loki complements the bureaucracy of the TVA in Marvel's Loki. If you haven't seen it already, quick plug, it's a great show. Needless to say, this enhanced for me a number of characters in the story, but none more so than Ging. And with Gon now laying somewhere in intensive care elsewhere, I was hoping and praying that finally, now that this Ging character is staying in one known place for extended periods of time, it would be amazing if Killua could find a way to help his friend recover so that he could, see his dad. Normally in circumstances like these, when some previously unknown mechanic is made possible through some otherwise unknown person in order to revive someone we thought was lost, normally this would bother me to such an extent that I would have a difficult time enjoying the rest of the story, but really, this Alluka plotline is handled superbly well. We learn of her interesting and honestly frightening set of powers and the equivalent exchange that seems to go hand in hand with them. You ask for one thing and she shall grant it for you, but then you need to do 3 things for her in order to balance the spreadsheet, so to speak. She's effectively the means by which Gon makes a miraculous recovery during this material, and if that's all there was to this encounter, then you'd be hearing a very different song being sung by me right now. But thankfully, there's much more meat to this plot thread, and one that leans heavily into the themes of family and abuse Killua's character has been exploring since the beginning. Unlike the rest of his family, Killua cares deeply about his sister and will do anything for her well-being. Reading through flashbacks which capture the early moments of their toxic familial relationship altering Alluka's treatment are both harrowing, scary, and emotionally powerful, particularly when we fully come to grips with how they've been treating her all this time. Symbolically, this is the most overt defiance of his family's wishes Killua has performed thus far, and it's for the benefit of another. Again, a terrific contrast with the scared individual that would be afraid to overextend himself, particularly evident in the first arc when confronted by his brother Illumi being the most evident of this. And as Killua to his face defies him time and again in this arc, it's supremely satisfying, and what's more is that Killua uses this relationship with Alluka to outmaneuver and outthink his oppressive family, aiding in his escape of the compound en route to the hospital housing Gon. As mentioned above, there are 2 separate plot threads running side by side here, and neither are connected until the very end of the story. The first being Killua's rescue and ultimate delivery of Alluka to Gon's bedside to heal him, all the while running from... And the second is... Once Leorio arrives at the scene during the Q&A for the chairman voting situation, he is the first to hop up to the podium and asks a rather pointed question towards Ging, asking the very question we've wanted to ask all along. Why hasn't he even attempted to see his son? And unsatisfied with the answer, Leorio unveils to us and Ging his Nen type. Catching him off guard with a massive punch to the face, this was, and I cannot begin to express how much love I had for it upon first reading. If this isn't one of the best moments in the series, I don't know what is, and this sequence pretty much sets the trend in place for the rest of this half of the story. Leorio plays a leading role in injecting just the right amount of heart and humor into this story to allow me to enjoy the rest of the material as much as I did. I mean, Leorio's indifference to being chairman at the Hunter Association coupled with his preposterous popularity cemented him as my favorite character in this series. He's just so much fun, and I'm not even done talking about him in this section yet. But first, let's finish off Killua's story with Alluka.
ゾルディック家にはもう一人弟がいる。こいつを始末したい。
Due to the flashback nature of Alluka's ability, Illumi takes the initiative and attempts to kill his brother before he can make a wish with Alluka. Regardless of how I may or may not feel about Alluka coming into the story, her involvement offered a great mechanism that pushes Killua and his family into conflict. This arc pulled a lot of weight that I honestly wasn't expecting, with the first being a terrific capping off to Killua's character arc, once a young man petrified by the very sight of his brother Illumi, and now he's strategizing to outmaneuver and defy him at every possible turn. And not really in an effort to affirm anything necessarily necessarily about himself or to raise his own standing. Instead, it is for the benefit of his sister and his best friend in the world. This sequence, from the car chase, the involvement of the butlers, their conflicting allegiances, and the strategy from Killua employing the hot air balloons, all the while Alluka provides numerous instances of scare and horror, made for a brilliant action sequence that had me captivated from the beginning to the very end. With, of course, the clear highlights of this section coming by way of any direct involvement from Hisoka or Illumi. But perhaps most significantly, what I loved about this sequence was how it highlighted the greatest strengths Gon has: his ability to make lasting and powerful relationships with people. His ability to make friends with Killua ended up making the surge of power he gained to kill Pito possible to return from, and his bond with Leorio had him in the running for winning chairman of the Hunters Association and would have given him the power to dedicate all resources of the association to his recovery. And all of this happens within the arc we anticipate he will meet his father, someone that not too long ago lamented over Gon's reliance on his friends, citing that trait as a weakness in him. Overall, it's a powerful and satisfying merging of themes. Eventually, Killua reaches Gon's bedside and it cuts to Leorio's continued success in the race, and in the middle of another speech where he expresses his concern and sense of powerlessness to help Gon, the young hunter barges into the auditorium, leading Leorio to embrace him tightly. This moment was so sweet that I actually welled up a little bit, and yes, this was the moment that got me emotional. If you commented that down below, congratulations, you know me very well. This was exactly the sort of stuff that I was missing from Hunter x Hunter. Kurapika, Leorio, and Killua made such a brilliant team of clashing personalities that once it became almost entirely about Killua and Gon's dynamic, that very dynamic became a little less special, which was a shame because I do love those characters, and while Kurapika isn't in this arc at all, the tone and power of this arc was helped immeasurably by Leorio. The last two chapters where Gon finally gets to share more than a fleeting exchange with his father is a fitting end to what has been a long story told over the course of 339 chapters. While I personally didn't like Ging as a person, I don't think it was important that I did or did not, and the final panels of Gon's time spent with Ging focus not on Jing's happiness or their collective joy together, though that is definitely present here and there. Primarily what I felt this arc focused on towards the end was the wonder and joy Gon feels in that moment with his dad. He's achieved what he set out to do from the very beginning, and in a way that's so cathartic and powerful and emotional and brilliant to me. To open up a bit, I've got a rather complicated family history, and it's one that I've been very conscious was painting my expectations and reactions to most parts of this story from the beginning. When I was 3 years old, my parents divorced, leaving me to bounce between homes as they both wanted to be in my life. I didn't mind this at all, and really I consider my childhood to be a very secure and happy one. I was very lucky. I do, however, have a younger brother, 7 years younger in fact. One my mother had with another partner after, and long story short, he left when my brother was just 1 year old. And to this day, we've never seen him again. And growing up, it sort of put me into a strange role, something akin to half a brother and half a father once I got old enough. And reading through this story, looking at what Gon was going through, how he was feeling, and what sort of clumsy and unkind treatment Ging placed in front of him, all because he either didn't want to engage or was nervous to, invoked strong and personal feelings I had regarding that situation in my real life. So when I say that I loved Hunter x Hunter, I'm not saying that just to appease an audience I know loves the series also. I sincerely mean it, as it gave me an avenue to better explore my own complicated feelings surrounding my family's history and the love I have for my brother. From outsiders looking in, I think it's easy to look at a situation like this objectively and see it for what it is. But when people you love are involved and waters are muddied, suddenly the right choice of action isn't obvious and it becomes a series of compromises and trade-offs. Hunter x Hunter explored all of those in great detail through a variety of different avenues, coming to a head during the traumatic and devastating Chimera Ant's arc, and thankfully climbed out of that despair and injected the hope and optimism I looked to these stories initially for. And so, in an effort to subvert the genre consistently, it for me managed to create one of the most cathartic shonen moments I've yet read through. Unlike other stories, I don't think Hunter x Hunter is one that can be fully captured and realized without digesting it all, and while I'm aware that Kurapika's story continues on after this, the heart of this tale for me was Gon, and to see his story meet a fittingly heartwarming conclusion in a series that has been described as notoriously grim and incomplete was one of the most beautiful surprises I've ever received from a manga. Maybe this story will continue, maybe it won't, but whether it does or it doesn't has no impact on how happy I am to have read it and to have shared it with all of you these last few months. As always, I've been Totally Not Mark. I'll see you all next weekend. Thank you so much for watching.